You might have heard the name Hyperliquid thrown around, but do you actually know what it is? Today, we're going to dive into what it is and what the controversy around it over the past week has been. We'll be discussing a little bit about the airdrop, the price action of the coin itself, the hype that is surrounding it all, and the tech behind it. Intro. Hyperliquid is an order book perpetual futures DEX that offers the same features, execution, and UX as centralized exchanges. The Hyperliquid L1 is the blockchain that powers the DEX. It is designed from the ground up to be performant enough to operate the whole exchange. Every order, cancel, trade, and liquidation happens transparently on-chain with a block latency of under 1 second. If I were to just read this introduction and take it with face value, then I would say, man, that sounds amazing. But with everything that's happened over the past week, I think it's incredibly important to talk about what these words mean and why they matter so much. Let's read this tweet from one of the co-founders of Hyperliquid that was posted back in May of this year. The Hyperliquid L1 will be transitioning to HyperBFT, a custom consensus algorithm written from the ground up. The implementation is in final stages of testing on testnet. The mainnet migration is expected to happen in the coming weeks. The Hyperliquid L1 is one of a few chains in production with real demand above 20K transactions per second. With the scope expanding far beyond perps trading, more on that later, it's crucial to optimize the foundational consensus algorithm. Like most modern consensus algorithms, HyperBFT is based on hot stuff and subsequent improvements. Huge thanks to the researchers who continue to push the boundaries of what is possible on a decentralized state machine. Now, if you read this and combine it with what we just read about what the Hyperliquid L1 is, you would think that this is an incredibly decentralized DEX or perpetuals DEX, meaning that you can trade on margins that is hyper fluid and very fast, right? Well, let's take a look at the platform itself. Okay, if you look at the platform, it looks like an incredibly nice UI. The user interface is incredibly nice. The UX is also very clean. I obviously can't use this in the United States because it's restricted in my jurisdiction. Let's take a look at the hype token. So as you can see, at the end of November, when the airdrop took place, it was trading for under $4. Today, it's trading for over $25, and it reached an all-time high of $34.96, almost $35, which is fascinating because most airdrops do the exact opposite of what we're seeing here. But there is so much utility built into this coin itself that it makes for a very prospering ecosystem. You can stake this coin in the future. The staking mechanism is actually on the testnet right now for anybody to check out. You can go to the app.hyperliquidtestnet.xyz/staking, and you can see the staking platform here. The hype token is also the gas token for the layer 1. Therefore, the more people use this exchange, the more the token is going to be burned. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the stats of the platform itself. You can go back to November 29th when it launched, the token launched, and you can see how much it's grown in market cap, volume, and perps volume, along with TVL. It's done a phenomenal job, but you can see the past few days it's dropped quite significantly, and that is because of the controversy that we're going to get into here. Tevano, who many people know in the crypto industry, she works for Consensus. She worked on My Ether wallet back in the day. She is incredibly important in this space. She focuses mainly on cybersecurity in the crypto ecosystem. She reached out to the Hyperliquid team because she noticed some, I guess, strange interactions happening on their blockchain with potential North Korean hackers. And so she put out a message to them saying, I'm quite concerned that you guys are at increased risk due to the fact that we know that these specific threat actors are now intimately familiar with your platform. I would like to walk you through some of the measures that your team can and should take to mitigate risk of a sophisticated attack. She then tweeted saying, "This is my offer from 2 weeks ago. It still stands, Hyperliquid. I'm still happy to do an async or a call with you guys. I can even give you one of my super nice, happy colleagues if you don't like me," because apparently they said that she was rude and unprofessional. But this entire dialogue on Twitter got blown way out of proportion, or maybe it's exactly where it needs to be. Basically, this is what Saigar on Twitter put as a response to all of this, breaking it down into a TLDR for anyone. The bad: wouldn't be surprised if North Korean hackers were looking at ways to attack. 3 out of 4 validators would need to be compromised to withdraw all 2.3 billion USDC from the bridge. The fact that there are only 4 validators on this chain right now, though, is very alarming, because to call it decentralized is just a stretch of the imagination. 4 validators is incredibly centralized, and we can talk more about that in the comments if you guys would like. Leave a comment on your thoughts on that, but let's keep going. The good: 2 lines of defense can kick in to prevent money from being stolen should an attack happen. Circle can freeze attacker's address to prevent stolen money from being used. Arbitrum could roll back the chain to undo the attacks and restore the Hyperliquid bridge. So for those that are unaware, the bridge is from Arbitrum to Hyperliquid. So if there was an attack on the bridge itself, which is where most of these security vectors are, that could be a potential outcome, that Arbitrum rolls its blockchain back. But then again, we're talking about decentralized platforms here, talking about crypto, and that goes against the ethos of what crypto is and what decentralization is. If we're talking about rolling back an entire chain, that is not decentralized at all. The takeaway: I wouldn't be full-on panicking over this right now. There are guardrails in place should the worst possible outcome happen. It remains to be seen whether or not validators can be compromised in the first place. I don't know anything about Hyperliquid's OPSEC, but I imagine they'd be quite good at it considering how critical each of the 4 validators is. Again, I don't really know if that last bit right there was sarcastic, but it seems to be on my end. Let's talk about their response, because, like I said, Tevano's tweet got a lot of focus on the security of Hyperliquid, and this was the team's response. Everyone wanted Hyperliquid to respond to the allegations of an impending hack, so here it is. TLDR, there is no exploit, all funds are seifu. Hyperliquid Labs is aware of reports circulating regarding activity by supposed North Korean hacker addresses. There has been no exploit, or any exploit for that matter, of Hyperliquid. All user funds are accounted for. Hyperliquid Labs takes OPSEC seriously. No vulnerabilities have been shared by any party. As always, there is a generous bounty program for bug reports. Best-in-class standards are followed for blockchain analytics. Someone claiming to be a security party previously attempted to reach out to Labs. To be clear, there was never any allegation of any exploit on Hyperliquid. This party added a scam account to a group chat and later communicated with insults and profanity. Given the level of professionalism displayed, Labs conferred instead with trusted parties and confirmed it is following best practices. So that is their take on all of this. Obviously, there are two sides to every coin, and so you'll have to take both of these allegations with a grain of salt. Now, with all of that being said, I want to stress that Hyperliquid, even though it's claiming to be a decentralized exchange or a perp dex, whatever you want to call it, it is very far from that at this point. Now, obviously, the future can change these things, right? But at the moment, it does not seem very decentralized, and it also isn't open source. So how can they say that they built something from the ground up without showing us the source of what they built? I think that it's very fascinating that they've chosen to call themselves a decentralized exchange while having a closed source system. So I asked a couple of AI sources what their thoughts were on this. I went to Venice and asked it, tell me what you know about HyperBFT. It didn't know anything about it. So I said, okay, in reference to Hyperliquid, and it said I couldn't find any information about HyperBFT in relation to Hyperliquid. Okay, that's strange. It's not the end of the world, but it is strange. So then I asked Grok, what makes Hyperliquid's L1 faster than other L1s? Is the underlying tech just a Geth SDK? It said Hyperliquid's Layer 1 blockchain is designed with several key attributes that contribute to its high performance, setting it apart from other L1 blockchains. The Hyperliquid L1 is optimized to handle a significant volume of transactions with capabilities up to 100,000 orders per second. Okay, cool. How? Unlike relying on commonly used blockchain frameworks like Geth SDK or Cosmos SDK, Hyperliquid has developed HyperBFT from scratch. How does it know that? Well, its source is the Medium articles that Hyperliquid has posted, so I'll take that with a grain of salt. I then asked, are those fast block times a security risk? Because it talks about how these block times are less than a second, and if you've been studying blockchains for as long as I have, you know that block times actually matter when it comes to security risks. And this is what Grok had to say. Fast block times can indeed introduce certain security risks, but they also come with mitigations depending on how the blockchain is designed. And so it goes in to talk about the security of these transactions, the validator incentives and penalties, and the fact that there are currently only 4 validators on the chain itself. I'm assuming that they have the proper incentives to handle these transactions right now on the chain, considering how much volume there's been. There's probably tons of incentives for these 4 validators on the chain. So probably nothing to worry about at this point, but if their idea is to decentralize the network and get a lot more validators, then you have to start talking about these security risks, because people could act in a manner like we've talked about on my channel in the past. There are Solana validators that are acting mischievously to gain an upper hand against other people, creating mev bots that are destroying people on Radium. So these things are things that you have to take a look at when discussing security on the chain. Okay, with all of that being said, what are my final thoughts on Hyperliquid? Well, first of all, I think that they should open source their project as soon as possible. If you're going to be operating in this space, then that's the number one thing, right? Now, I understand why they might be keeping it closed source at this point, because they have a lot of testing to do. They want to make sure that they're taking the proper security measures. Fine, that's totally cool. But do not call yourself a decentralized exchange at this point, because you're not. Let's just be honest here. And I would have to say that if I had asked anybody on the Hyperliquid team, that they would probably agree with that statement at this point. Now, that's not to say that things can't change in the future. What do I think about the token itself, Hype? Well, if they continue to incentivize things with the token itself, then I think it's going to be incredibly profitable for those that hold the token, for those that stake the token, especially if they continue to see the transaction volume that they've seen thus far in just the past month. What do I think about the security risks? Well, again, this kind of goes back to open sourcing and putting all of their cards on the table. They've obviously reached out to other security professionals out there, and so I'm going to leave that one up in the air and not make a statement on it at this point. But what I will say is that I haven't touched Hype yet. I don't think I will anytime soon, but I will be keeping an eye on this project because I think it's very fascinating what they're trying to achieve here. Keep in mind that the end goal is not to be just a perpetuals decentralized exchange. It's to be an actual layer 1 blockchain that hosts transactions and smart contracts for everything. They do have an EVM compatible aspect to their chain itself, so people that build in Solidity on EVM can do so on Hyperliquid. I really do hope the best for the Hyperliquid team, and I think that they have a very promising project here. I obviously don't want to see any type of hacks in the crypto ecosystem because at the end of the day, that affects everyone here, not just Hyperliquid and those token holders. It affects everyone across the board, so I wish them the best of luck. I hope that they have the best security practices in mind and in place. With all that being said, if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to hit that like button. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, hit that sub button. That's going to be it for this video though. Thank you so much for watching. Capital Recon out.